As developers, oftentimes we have to interact with APIs or even create our own APIs. In this video, we're going to discuss what an API is, what REST is, and how to create your own API using Express.js. Let's begin. For this tutorial, you'll need a basic understanding of JavaScript, a computer, Windows, Mac, Linux, anything's fine, and then Node.js and NPM installed on your computer. So what is an API? An API is an interface that allows you to interact with an app, a resource, or a service. This could be a server, this could be a database, or some sort of back-end service, or whatever. When you have an API, all of these things can be accessed through a single entry point, your API. So if you were to have a mobile app, a web app, and a desktop app, these three different platforms for your application, you could have all of them interact with your backend using an API, as opposed to having to reach out to all of these different resources independently. The benefits to an API is that you have a uniform way to interact with these resources. So more or less, all of these platforms are communicating to the backend in the same way. Additionally, you have a uniform way of securing access to your backend. So whatever authentication method you have set up on your API, that's going to be how everything accesses your resources. And then, of course, there's a bunch of other reasons, but we won't go into that right now. So what is REST? REST is a standard rule set for how APIs work over the internet, basically. REST defines a set of operations that can be used for creating, reading, updating, or deleting resources with APIs. Examples of these methods are, GET. GET is for reading data and only reading data. POST. POST is meant for creating data. PUT is meant for replacing data. Patch is meant for modifying data. And then you have delete, meant for deleting data. And then finally we have Express. Express is a Node.js framework that allows us to easily stand up web servers. And it's one of the most popular Node.js frameworks. With Express, you can build APIs, you can serve websites, and you can actually do a lot more. So now that we've covered some of the basics, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so let's talk about what we're going to actually build here. We're going to build an API that returns a list of movie titles. This is going to basically be a bunch of strings in an array. To do this, we're going to set up a basic Express project. We're going to set up a GET endpoint that returns the list of movie titles. And then we're going to test this API a few different ways, actually. First using the command line, and then using Postman, a popular tool for testing APIs. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually get our project set up. On your computer, create a folder so that you can store your project files. For me, I created this folder called Express Live Demo. Once you've created your folder, open up a terminal window and cd into the directory. Once you're in the folder, type npm init, and that'll allow you to create a package.json file. We're going to just hit enter to accept all of the defaults until we get to the very end. And you'll see that it created this package.json file here. Now to install Express, we just need to type npm I express. And from there you'll see that it created this node modules folder and this package lock.json file. Okay, so now that we have Express and we have our package.json file, let's create our index.js file. You can just create a blank file called index.js. however you like. I'm going to create it by typing touch index.js, and then I'll just create a blank file. Okay, so now that we have all of that, we can go ahead and start adding our code to index.js. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up our index.js file so we can add some code to it. You can open it up in whatever text editor you like. I'm going to open mine in Visual Studio Code. Okay, so now that I have my text editor open, let's start adding some basic stuff. First thing is, why don't we go ahead and import Express? To do that, we can type const express equals require express. Okay. That gives us our Express import. Next, we're going to create an instance of Express by creating a variable called app. Then we're going to create a variable called port and set it to 3000. So Express import here allows us to use Express. Const app is going to be our actual Express application, so this is how we're going to be able to interact with Express. And then this port variable here, we're going to use it later to tell Express which port we want to have our web server operate on. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to give Express some what we call middleware to use. Basically plugins. The first one that I'm doing is express.json. This allows Express to process JSON data when you're sending information to your APIs. The second one I'm going to use is express.url encoded. This does something similar to the express.json, but it allows URL encoded form data to be sent to your API. app.use is a function that will load these two plugins that I specified. Next, I'm going to create some dummy data. As we mentioned that we're going to build a database. Or more so, we're going to build an API that's going to give us movie information from a database. So this will be our dummy database. So we'll just go ahead and add a few movies. All right. Now that we have that, let's go ahead and add some of the fun stuff. On the app object, you're going to have a bunch of different functions and objects. We're going to call one called get, a function called get. And what app.get does is it sets up an event listener. And this listener is going to listen for any sort of requests that are called on this route path that we're about to specify. So where it says name here, this is where we can specify the path that we want to listen on. So I'm going to put / to indicate that we're going to listen on the root path. We'll see what that means in a little bit. The get function can take a second argument, which is a callback. This callback function takes two parameters, rec and res. Rec is a request object. It basically allows you to access all sorts of information about the request that was sent to your API. Res is a response object. This allows us to send a response back to the client that made the request to us. So in our example, what we're going to do is we're going to type res.send, and we're going to pass a string. Welcome to our API. Res.send sends a response back to the client. And the response that we're going to send is a string. Okay, we actually are almost done setting up our Express server. The last thing we need to do is we need to set up well, we need to tell our server to start listening for requests. So if we type app.listen, we basically can pass a port number as the first argument. So we're going to pass our port object. And then for the second argument, we're going to pass a callback function. And in this callback function, you can basically run code after the server has started. So we'll say example server has started on port, and we'll go ahead and put in the port number. So let's put a $, do all that, put port. Okay. And that should actually do it. Let's go ahead and save our file. And what we're going to do is we're going to move this terminal out of the way, or move this editor out of the way for a moment. And in our terminal, if we were to type node space index.js, this will actually run our app. And you'll see down here we got the message, example server has started on port 3000. So everything actually worked correctly. Let's go ahead and see if we can actually test this. The first way that we're going to test this is actually by just opening a web browser and seeing what happens when we go to localhost :3000. Localhost is your local machine, and the :3000 is the port that we're trying to access on your local machine. Alright, so we got our web browser. Let's go to localhost 3000. There we go. We have welcome to our API. So as mentioned before, the type of route that we set up here is a GET route. And you can see right here, app.get. When you use a web browser, your browser is automatically doing GET requests, and it's pulling down the web page and it's loading it. So that's why we're able to go to our browser and just type in localhost 3000 and get the route. Now, to finish this all off, how do we actually make it where we get the movie information? Because that's what we were supposed to be doing. What we could do, so if we go back to our code, is instead of saying res.send and then a string, we could do res.send and movie database. Let's go ahead and save that. I think we're actually going to have to start our server over again, yeah. Let's go ahead and go to our terminal where we started our server. I'm going to hit Control-C to stop the app. And then I'm going to type node index.js again. And I'll start the server again. And you'll see if we refresh it, there we go. We got our list of movies. Now let's quickly talk about the other ways that you can actually test this API out. The first thing we're going to try is using a tool called Postman. Postman is a very popular tool for testing APIs. Okay, I'm loading my Postman here. And let me go ahead and create a new request. I went up to, oops, let me dismiss this. I went up to new and then HTTP request. And if I were to type localhost :3000 and then I were to hit send, you'd see we get our list here. You'll see the method is set to get. And you'll actually see here's a bunch of other methods that you can do. If I were to try to do post, I'll probably get an error. And that's because our application is not set up to receive post requests yet. But if I do Git, you'll see Git works just fine. What's neat about Postman is that it also offers the ability to make the requests in other languages, or it'll offer code snippets that allows you to make requests in different languages for the endpoints that you're testing within the app. So for instance, right here, we're making a GET request to localhost 3000. If I were to hit this little code button up here and then go to curl, it'll show me how to make the same request using curl. So I'm going to copy this. And if you have curl on your Windows machine, or if you're just on a Mac or a Linux machine, what you can do is you can run this curl command in a terminal, and you'll see there is our response. So this is essentially the basics of how to set up a REST API using Express. In the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to show you how to do different types of methods with your API. So post so that you can add data to your database, or delete so that you can delete data from the database. Okay, so now that we've created our first endpoint, our first API route with Express, some quick tips. First thing is that your endpoint must always return a response. Otherwise, your client is going to hang waiting until it eventually gives up and times out. The second thing is that if your API accesses anything that's not meant to be public, then you're going to want to secure your API. You do this by adding something like basic auth, OAuth, or some whatever authentication, and we'll actually cover that later on down the line. But that's it for this video. If you have any questions or if you have any tips of your own, feel free to post down in the comments. And then if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like. Also subscribe to the channel if you wish to get more content like this. Alright, well, happy coding.